Hello and welcome to Engineer's Mindset. So today we'll continue with question 11 on Physics Jamb 2022 past questions. The question says, which of the following liquid is a poor conductor of electricity? Option A, we have distilled water. Option B, we have tap water. Option C, we have seawater. Option D, we have drinking water. The truth is that virtually all the waters we use in real life are contaminated or has a little amount of impurity in them. So distilled water is actually a completely pure water without no amount of impurities. It is the impurity content in the water that actually would attract conduction to electricity. So distilled water has no amount of impurities, hence it's a very poor conductor of electricity. So the correct option is option A, distilled water. Question 12 says, an isotope has an initial activity of 120 BQ. 6 days later, its activity is 15 BQ. Question says the half-life is, option A give us 3 days, option B 2 days, option C 1 day, option D 4 days. Okay, now the relationship between the initial and final activity to the number of decay is giving us 1 over 2 to the power of n is equal to final activity all over initial activity, where n stands for the number of decay. Okay, so if we go through the question, it says an isotope has an initial activity of 120 BQ, and then 6 days later its activity is 15 BQ. So 15 BQ is actually the final activity, while the initial activity is 120 BQ. All right, so we're going to have 1 over 2 to the power of n is equal to final BQ was given as 15 all over initial BQ was given as 120. Okay, so we'll have 1 over 2 to the power of n is equal to, if we divide 120 by 15, we'll have 0.125. We have 0.125. Okay, mathematically 0.125 in fraction will give us this 1 over 2 to the power of n equals 1 over 8. In fraction, 0.125 is simply 1 over 8. Okay, so you have 1 over 2 to the power of n equals 1 over 8. So we can actually break this down to be 1 over 2 to the power of n equals 1 over 8 is simply 2 to the power of 3. Okay, so we compare the numerator. Comparing the numerator, we have that 1 is equal to 1. Then we compare the denominator. Comparing the denominator, we have that 2 to the power of n is equal to 2 to the power of 3. Okay, so 2 cancels 2. That simply implies that the number of decay is actually what? Equal to 3. But this is not it. We are given that after 6 days its activity is 15. Therefore the half-life is actually number of days all over number of decay. Okay, and this is equal to number of days was given as 6 days, number of decay is actually 3. So the correct option is 6 divided by 3, which is 2 days. Okay, all right, so if you look at the option B is 2 days, so the correct option is option B, 2 days. Question 13 says the secondary pigment consists of A, blue, green and violet, B, yellow, green and magenta, C, magenta, yellow and cyan, D, red, green and blue. Okay, the truth is we have 3 primary colors, and the primary colors that we have include red, blue and green. These are the 3 primary colors that we have. Every other color outside these 3 are called secondary color. So if you look at the options, we have blue and green. Blue and green are primary colors, so definitely option A is not an option because the question says secondary pigment or secondary color. That's what it means. Option B says yellow, green. There is green. Green is a primary color, so blue number option B is not an option. Okay, option C says magenta, yellow and cyan. None of the primary colors appears here, so therefore option C is the answer. The correct answer is option C. These are the secondary colors. Okay, Question 14 says a person standing waist deep in a swimming pool appears to have shorter legs because of option A says diffraction, option B says refraction, option C says reflection, option D says interference. Well, a person who stands inside a pool appears to have shorter legs due to what is called refraction. So the correct option is option B, refraction. Question 15 says a tuning fork having a frequency of 312 Hz emits a wave which has a wavelength of 1.10 meters. Question says calculate the velocity of sound. Okay, now we know that velocity is given as frequency times lambda, where lambda is the wavelength. Okay, so this is now equal to the frequency was given as 312 hertz times lambda being the wavelength was given as 1.10. so that simply implies velocity is equal to, this will give us 343.2 meters per second. So the correct option is option C. Question 16 says when the area of a capacitor is increased, what happens? Okay, so I'm going to display the options now. Then the correct option actually is option D. Capacitor is actually a device that is used to store energy in the form of charges. So if you have a smaller portion of the capacitor, it means you store small amount of energy. But if the area of the capacitor is increased, it also increases its ability to store more energy. So increase in the correct option is option D. The capacity also increases, or the capacitor also increases in size. Yeah. Alright, question 17 says a relay magnet is used for, so I'm going to display the options now. Okay, just go through it again. A magnetic relay or a relay magnet is simply an electromechanical device which is responsible for switching. Okay, so it has one or more contacts for opening and closing circuits. So the correct option is actually option B, control another circuit carrying larger current. So the correct option is option B. Question 18 says according to kinetic molecular model of gas. Okay, so I'm going to display the options now. But according to kinetic molecular theory of gases actually, the molecules of gases actually have a random motion. They move in zigzag, and that's random motion, and they occupy the entire space of the container which they found themselves. So the correct option to this question is actually option C. The molecules are very far apart and occupy all the space made available to them. The correct option is option C. Question 19 says a current of 0.5 amp flows through a resistor when connected to a 40 volt battery. How much energy is dispatched in 2 minutes? Okay, option A says 2400 joules, option B 9600 joules, option C 1500 joules, option D 1200 joules. Okay, so in order to determine the energy flowing through a resistor, the formula is simply given as energy is equal to IVT, where I stands for the current, V stands for the voltage, and T stands for the time. Okay, so we have energy equals to the current was given as 0.5 amps, so we have 0.5 times the potential difference, or the voltage was given as 40 volts, so we have times 40 volts times the time was given as 2 minutes. But you know that time is usually measured in seconds, so we have 2 minutes is equivalent to 2 times 60 seconds. Okay, so 2 minutes is simply 2 times 60 seconds. So in terms of seconds, it's going to give us 120 seconds. Okay, so this is now equal to let's multiply all through and see. So we'll have that to be 2400 joules. So the correct option is actually option A, 2400 joules. Question 20 says for a pear shape shown above, the concentration of charge on the outside is highest at option A says X, option B says Z, option C says Y, option D says K. Okay, so let's take a look at the diagrams. First of all, the equation is saying concentration of charge, and of course the whole of these charges are actually concentrated at point X. The whole of any charge falling outside this shape is actually concentrated at point X. So we'll have the highest charge to be found concentrated at point X. So the correct option is actually option A. Alright guys, so I'm going to pause the video here so it doesn't get too long and boring. Please do well to subscribe to the channel to get updates notification when I will release question 21 to question 30, and then from question 31 to question 40, and then subsequent past questions on physics, chemistry, biology and the likes. Thanks very much. I will see you in the next video. Cheers.